Greetings, you filthy heretics. My name is Kamikaze, and Warhammer 40,000 is awesome. There's also been a lot of newfound interest in it, with huge, surprisingly mainstream games like Rogue Trader, Dark Tide, and especially Space Marine 2. And if you're a newcomer to Warhammer who has, say, played Space Marine 2, you may have a few questions, like, why do all of our buildings look like giant cathedrals? Why are there skulls everywhere? Are we the good guys? And who is this emperor that nobody ever shuts up about? Hey, watch yourself with the blasphemy, you. And allow me to give you a very brief overview of the wacky, grimdark world of Warhammer 40,000. What the hell even is Warhammer? Glad you asked. Warhammer 40,000 started as a tabletop strategy game focused around the building, painting, and fighting of small plastic men. Yes, we collect toy soldiers here, but hey, look how cool they are. It was originally a sci-fi spin-off of the, at the time, very generic Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which is why you ended up with a lot of fantasy tropes like orcs and elves, but in space. Since its humble beginnings though, while the tabletop is still a huge part of it, it has now exploded into a vast, deep universe of movies, TV shows, video games, and literally hundreds of books. As much as I love Warhammer, by far the biggest problem with it is that it is incredibly difficult to get into. The main tabletop game is extremely expensive and time-consuming, and most of the books and games require some degree of pre-existing knowledge. So today I'm going to start with the very basics. Quick aside to any 40k vets who may be watching this, yes, I'm going to skip and massively oversimplify a lot of stuff, but I also don't claim to be an expert, so if I get anything blatantly wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments. All I ask is that you be gentle with me. So, we are in the year 40,000, hence the name Warhammer 40,000, aka the 41st millennium. And let me tell you, in the future, everything sucks. Constantly stuck in a state of perpetual war, a whole bunch of different factions of humans, demons, and aliens fight for control of the galaxy. It's like Game of Thrones, but in space, and with way more murder. I don't think there's any fictional universe that is simultaneously as dark and over the top as Warhammer. This is a world where a group of militant nuns in power armor use pipe organ missile launchers to combat magical Egyptian Terminators, the Zerg, and literal demons from hell. And it very much operates on the rule of cool. Why does everyone use melee combat when they have guns? Because it's cool. Why do these blue fishmen have Gundam suits? Because it's cool. Why is this sword also a chainsaw? Because. So that's what 40k is. It's a lot of really elaborate advertising to get you to spend all of your money on toys. But today, I will be your humble tour guide to the major players in this game of galactic conquest. But first, I would like to take a moment to talk to you about our Lord and Savior, Satan, and his three weird cousins. So, hell is real in 40k, and it's called the Warp. And it's not exactly like hell, more of a generic afterlife, but it's hard to explain, so for the sake of brevity, just think of it as hell. It's both good and bad. Every living being is connected to the Warp via mind and soul, and when we die, our souls drift away into the Warp. Some people are even born with an especially strong connection to it. This allows them to use it to their advantage and actually channel its power through their mind, which can manifest in many ways like lightning, telekinesis, fireballs, and yes, they're wizards, okay? You can't call them wizards because it's sci-fi, but they're wizards. We call them psychers. The warp is also our means of travel. There is no true faster-than-light travel in 40k, so the way races get around long, galactic-scale distances is by going into the warp, where time and space basically have no meaning, and then coming out somewhere else. Sort of like using a wormhole, or I've heard it compared to nether travel in Minecraft. All great. Now, the bad news is that it's full of demons. The demons within it are collectively referred to as the forces of chaos, and they are generally ruled by 4 chaos gods. Yes, evil gods who would absolutely destroy the galaxy if they could stop bickering like old ladies for 5 minutes. I'll go over each of them in the chaos section of this video, but for now, just know that none of them like each other, but they also don't like us, and that's bad. But with the warp and chaos quickly introduced, now I will tell you about the major players in the galaxy. There are 3 main umbrellas that each faction fall under: Chaos, Xenos, and the one we'll start with today, the Imperium of Man.
Hans, are we the baddies?
The Imperium of Man is humanity. Us. Hooray! But we suck. How did we get from this to this? 10,000 years ago, humanity was in a bad spot. So, 40k took the generic sci-fi route, where humanity, after the 21st century, developed some really cool technology, spread out amongst the stars, basically conquered the galaxy, and then we had the typical AI uprising that left humanity in ruins. They completely fast forward through this part, and it's called the Dark Age of Technology. And it's basically only told about in sort of myths and legends. The Dark Age of Technology came to an end, though, with the Age of Strife, which, again, I'm going to basically skip over, but just know, from the name, the Age of Strife, it was bad. Basically, the warp got all fucky, and interstellar travel became impossible for like 5,000 years. We completely crumbled from a galactic civilization to being near extinction. And all of this is not super important. It's basically just backstory for why we had super insane technology, but also were almost extinct in the year 30,000. And it is here, in the year 30,000, at humanity's darkest hour, that our story really begins. On the Mad Max-esque hellscape Earth had become, the Emperor of Mankind emerged. A true living demigod. Where did he come from? No one knows. How old is he? No one knows. Why is he 10 feet tall and the most powerful psyker of all time? No one knows. There are lots of theories and hints, but at the end of the day, it's never been confirmed, and he just sort of showed up. Not just him, though. He showed up with a legion of genetically engineered super soldiers called the Thunder Warriors. He used them to reconquer Earth, and then fine-tuned the recipe into the Space Marines that we all know and, well, tolerate. He then set out on his great crusade to reassert humanity as the dominant force in the galaxy. He led humanity to a golden age of technological process, expansion, and peace, if you were human. He also instilled the imperial truth, which is that humans were the masters of their own destiny and that religion is cringe. So this was going pretty well, but eventually he decided that things weren't going fast enough for his liking. He didn't really trust anyone else to lead in his stead, though, and as powerful as he was, he couldn't be in 2 places at once. Or could he? What if he could be in not 1, not 2, but 20, strike that, 18 places at once? It was with this in mind that he created the Primarchs. And Primarch is a word you'll hear a lot of, so pay attention. Primarchs were the Emperor's sons, created by splicing his own DNA with a couple of other powerful humans, sometimes some animals, and maybe a little sprinkle of chaos juice thrown in there just for kicks. 18 loyal, sons to lead his Space Marines and conquer the galaxy. They all represented an aspect of the Emperor. His strength, his compassion, his strategic brilliance, his, luscious hairdo. What the fuck do you do here, Fulgrim? Great. Then, remember Chaos? Well, they did the most chaotic thing possible. They kidnapped all of the little baby Primarchs and flung them out into the galaxy in different directions. "These are my sons, safe at home," said the Emperor. "Lol," said Chaos, "Lamau." So now the Emperor had to find his kids as well as lead humanity. They all landed on different planets, and as such had wildly different upbringings. Some of them were not too bad, and some of them were Angron. The Emperor found his sons, though, one by one, and as he did, he bestowed each Primarch with a shiny new Space Marine Legion made from their own DNA. and told them to go expand and bring glory to the Imperium. And at this point you may be thinking, gee whiz, this Emperor sure sounds like a pretty swell guy. But, no. Remember those Thunder Warriors I mentioned? Yeah, he murdered them. He was a ruthless tyrant who genocided countless alien species, brutally crushed rebellions, often didn't save his own people because it was too much work, and most importantly to the main story, he was an extraordinarily terrible father. All that aside, for a little while, things were alright. He finished rounding up his lost sons, and humanity expanded like crazy. Nothing good lasts, though, and eventually there was this whole thing called the Horus Heresy.
And if I cannot save it from your failure, Father, then let the galaxy burn.
The Emperor's favorite son, Horus, got corrupted by chaos, and he led half of the Primarchs in this massive rebellion against the Emperor. There are dozens of books, an entire spin-off board game about the heresy. But to make an incredibly long story short, Horus managed to make it all the way to Earth and dueled the Emperor mano a mano. He got absolutely blasted, but he did manage to horribly wound the Emperor in the process. Some of the other Primarchs then showed up to save the Emperor, and right before he could draw his last breath, they strapped him to the Golden Throne, which is basically a big life support machine that also happens to amplify his psychic power. I cannot possibly stress how much I am oversimplifying this event. This is like saying World War II was a conflict where this short dude named Hitler invaded some European countries, but then we teamed up with the Man of Steel and nuked Japan, so it was okay. But for the sake of this video not being 10 hours long, it'll have to do. 10,000 years have passed since this point, and the Imperium has slowly decayed along with its Emperor. He is still alive, by the way. He can't move or speak, and he looks like this. He's basically just a skeleton with a brain in it at this point. But he's still very important because he's always using his psyker power to basically cheat in conflict, and he powers the Astronomicon, which is like the Imperium's warp lighthouse. So if he dies, the Imperium's warp travels are donezo. Something else weird happened after the heresy, though. Over the next little while, all the other Primarchs disappeared. Not died, disappeared. Either they went into the warp for various reasons, or they fell asleep, or they just vanished. And eventually, without the guiding light of the Emperor or his sons, the Imperium rotted. It became a fascist, religiously fanatical dystopia. The Emperor of Mankind is now revered as the God Emperor of Mankind. Everyone in the Imperium worships him fervently. Speaking against him or saying anything bad about the Emperor will get you branded as a heretic, and you will be shot, burned, flayed alive. Don't be a heretic in Warhammer 40,000.
Squad! Ready! Aim! Fire!
The Ecclesiarchy, which is the state church dedicated to the Emperor, holds as much power, if not more, than the actual government. And on top of this, so much technology has been lost or forgotten, intolerance has been stuck on the word of the day calendar for millennia, and evil, corrupt leaders have ruled for far too long. It is here that humanity currently stands on the brink of collapse with internal and external threats all around. And on that cheery note, let's talk about the forces that make up the Imperium. Well, we kinda gotta start here, don't we? Look, if you know anything about 40k, it's probably the Space Marines. They are the poster boys, and they're the stars of hit media, all of it. They get all the lore. I'm not bitter. They are genetically engineered super soldiers, so big and strong they make Master Chief look like Joe Pesci. And these guys are basically the result of taking the Captain America super soldier serum, but instead of giving it to little wimpy Steve Rogers, you give it to a 6'5" super buff Navy SEAL. Then there's a lot of invasive surgery where you give them a bunch of extra organs that let them spit acid, breathe underwater, regrow limbs, etc. But the most important of these is what is called the gene seed. This is the DNA of one of the Primarchs, which is implanted into each Marine, and then they gain some of the traits and powers of their respective Primarch. Strap them into a tank with legs that they control with their mind, and voila! Space Marine. These guys really are on a whole other level of power than what you think of when you hear the phrase super soldiers. Like, they're barely even human anymore. They can bench press tanks and run faster than cheetahs. And they're also real assholes, for the most part. They tend to have pretty huge superiority complexes. Like, you know, I'm a demigod crafted for war. Why would I go out of my way to save these puny civilians, Lamau? This leads to them being usually revered, but sometimes hated, depending on who you talk to. In terms of military structure, Space Marines are separated into chapters. Each chapter has their own color scheme and identity in terms of personality and fighting. There are 1,000 Marines in each chapter, lol Black Templars, and there are roughly 1,000 chapters. Do the math, and that gives you about 1 million Space Marines in the galaxy at any given time. I'm not going to talk about all of the chapters because we don't have 3 weeks. I'm going to mention the founding chapters and the other ones that are playable on the tabletop, aka all of the important ones. Sorry to all 6 of you Crimson Fists fans out there. Little bit of terminology first. Originally there were 18 Space Marine Legions, one for each Primarch, and they could have unlimited Marines in them. After the heresy though, this guy, the Primarch of Paperwork, decided that the Legions would be split up into chapters of 1,000, each independently operated to prevent any one from holding too much power. Thus, the 9 original Loyalist Legions are referred to as the founding chapters, and everything else are called successor chapters. Okay, definitions out of the way, let's do this.
I'm merely observing the data, as I am taught to do by the Codex Astartes.
Ultramarines. The white bread of the white bread, the Ultramarines are the blue ones. You see them everywhere. They're on every poster, every box, they're all over the place. They're also the jack of all trades, they're good at everything. And they're also all depressed. See, for a long time, being the poster boys, the Ultramarines were basically perfect. They won all their battles, and they were just kind of the best. And this led to a lot of people really disliking them, as they were sort of the Mary Sues of 40k. But while Games Workshop makes a lot of questionable decisions, what they did with the Ultramarines to make them more interesting is pretty neat. Rather than retconning a bunch of their lore to make them less perfect, they basically gave all of the current Ultramarines horrible performance anxiety. They look at their ancestors and see all the amazing shit that they did, and they feel a ton of pressure to try to be as perfect as their reputation. They've also just gotten their Primarch back. Remember when I said all the Primarchs had disappeared? Well, this is their Primarch. And pause, look at his name, how do you think it's pronounced? I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, because I promise it's even stupider than you think. In the meantime, I shall call him Bobby G. 10,000 years ago, a little while after the Horus Heresy, Bobby G got stabbed in the neck with a poison dagger. Nobody could figure out how to save him, so they threw him into a stasis pod. It wasn't until very recently, both in lore and in real-life years, that with the help of some space elves, they finally managed to bring him back. So that's the good news. The bad news is that he's also depressed. Think about it. He comes back from the Great Crusade, when humanity was dope and conquered the stars, and then he wakes up here. So he's a bit bummed out about it. His first words upon waking back up were, "Why do I still live?" Eventually, though, his sense of duty won out, so he's still very depressed, but he's declared himself Lord Commander of the Imperium, and he's really trying his best to save this sinking ship. So that's the Ultramarines. Generic, jack of all trades, depressed. They're a lot cooler than they used to be. And, Robute Gilliman, by the way. Okay, let's see, that's 1 chapter down, and only 11 more to go. Okay, fuck, this is supposed to be brief. Alright, Space Marine Lightning Round. Dark Angels, really paranoid of the Fallen. Who are the Fallen? Shut the fuck up, you heretic. They look really cool, like knights, but in power armor. They're really edgy, all about interrogating people, and their Primarch is the Lion, a master strategist and real asshole who also recently came back after waking up from a 10,000-year nap. White Scars, gotta go fast. They're all about speed, bikes, cars, planes, even running. As long as it's fast, they like it. They're all Mongolian, and their Primarch is Jagatai Khan. He's an absolute boss, surprisingly funny, and probably the most underrated Primarch, although he is currently lost in a parallel dimension, so that kinda sucks. Space Wolves. Hey brother, you like wolves? I sure like wolves. We got wolves over here. Wolves in space. Space wolves, you might say. Our Primarch is Leaning Russ, the manliest man in the galaxy. He likes beer and fighting stuff. He's been stuck in the warp for the last 10,000 years suplexing demons. Hell yeah, brother Vikings in space. You should see the clipping on my Audacity when I recorded that clip. Oh my god. Imperial Fists. They are a brick wall. Their whole thing is being masters of defense and building stuff. They also have the biggest ship in the entire Imperium, called the Phalanx. And we stand the Phalanx because it's a floating cathedral the size of a small planet. Their Primarch is Rogel Dorn, who, much like his Legion, is incredibly stubborn. He's currently missing, and he could probably use a hand finding his way back. Blood Angels, vampires in space. They drink blood, and they also like poetry. They are haunted by their dead Primarch, and slowly go insane the longer they live, until they are lost in a total murder frenzy called the Black Rage. Their Primarch was Sanguinius, and he is super dead. Like, on screen, never coming back dead, which is a shame because he was pretty cool. Iron Hands. My personal favorite chapter, the Iron Hands are cyborg space marines. They believe the flesh is weak and they must cleanse their weakness by replacing their body parts with machinery. They're also huge dickheads, like even more than most space marines, what with civilians being made of weak, yucky flesh. Primarch of the Iron Hands is Ferrus Manus, which means Iron Hands in Latin. And did he have Iron Hands? You better believe he had Iron Hands. This is where I should point out, if it wasn't already obvious, that Games Workshop are not known for their subtlety. Oh, and he's also super dead, but he wasn't as cool as Sanguinius, so no one really cares. Salamanders. Fire it up, baby. If you love a bunch of big black men with flamethrowers, the Salamanders are your chapter. They love fire and giving people hugs. For real, they're very nice, and most people like Salamanders because sometimes they feel like the only actual good guys in the whole setting, unless confronted by defenseless Eldar children. Their Primarch is Vulcan. He is big, and he blew up. But it's fine because he's immortal, and he's just gonna respawn at some point. Raven Guard. Stealth. And birds. And stealthy birds. The masters of sneaky ambushes and sabotage, which is really impressive since they're wearing refrigerator-sized power armor at all times. And also birds. Did I mention they like birds? Their Primarch is Corvus Corax, which of course means Raven in Latin. He's lost in the warp somewhere, and may in fact be a giant demon bird monster now. Death Watch. Okay, we're done with the founding chapters and move on to something a bit irregular. The Death Watch are a special group of anti-Xenos Marines who don't make their own Marines, but instead pull from other chapters with experience fighting particular aliens. So you got a Tyranid invasion coming in. Give me 2 Ultramarines, a Salamander, and a Fist who all have experience fighting Tyranids. Grey Knights are also a specialty faction, but with demons. And they actually do have their own Marines, they don't pull them from other chapters. They're all Psychers, they love killing civilians, and their Primarch is the Emperor. Yes, the Emperor. Do not fuck with the Grey Knights. Black Templars. Oh my god, last one. The Black Templars are insane crusading religious psychos. You aren't praying to the Emperor? Well, then you better start praying to my fucking bolt gun, you heretic. They're all crazy, and I actually love them. I think they're super cool. They're a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, which means their Primarch is Rogel Dorn, and oh boy, did they inherit their daddy's anger issues. Okay, that's all of them. Every Space Marine I'll have to talk about in this video. Every single one. To say I have only skimmed the surface here is a colossal understatement, so if any of them pique your interest, I'll link a video by the man, the myth, the forehead Bricky that goes a bit more in depth on all of them. The thing with the Space Marines, though, is that every chapter is Space Marines, but with some kind of extra flavor applied. The Ultramarines are the standard default Space Marines, so if you understand them, you can very quickly get the gist of every other chapter. The Space Wolves are Space Marines, but with fangs, and they like melee. The Salamanders are Space Marines, but nicer, and they like flamethrowers. A lot of people don't like Space Marines because they're kind of too popular. They're the most popular faction to play on the tabletop, and they get ultra favoritism from Games Workshop. They get all the new models, they get all the cool animated videos, and I'm pretty sure most individual chapters have more books and lore than like every Xenos faction put together. Except Iron Hands. Cries. This just leads to them being kind of resented by fans of other factions. That being said, they're popular for a reason. They're pretty cool. So if you want to get into Space Marines, either collect the models or buy some of the books, definitely do not be discouraged. But with them out of the way, let's talk about a faction I like considerably more than Space Marines. You may be led to believe from the marketing that Space Marines are the #1 defenders of the Imperium, and you would be wrong. There's only 1 million Space Marines, and while that sounds like a lot, When your empire spans over 1 million planets, it really isn't. The Space Marines are the elites, the shock troopers, the big boys, only called in if something goes really poorly. So who actually does the bulk of the Imperium's fighting? The Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum. Tens or hundreds of billions of normal men and women, basically equipped with a Kevlar vest, a laser gun, and then told to go fight off the horrors of the galaxy. They also die a lot. Being normal humans, they're not very tough, and due to the massive number of guardsmen that can be present in any battle, guards are often slaughtered in the millions or billions, literally being used as cannon fodder sometimes, especially the new recruits. You have to survive a couple battles and prove your worth before you earn things like taking cover. They rely on huge numbers and overwhelming firepower to win big battles, but in smaller groups they are actually really well trained. The Guard are sorted into regiments, with regiments coming from different planets or areas, often having different appearances or specialties. These, for example, are Cadians, the classic green lads, dressed much like a modern military, just futured up a bit. They're the ones you see all over the place, very much the Ultramarines of the Guard, both in terms of their prevalence and that they're the jack of all trades. They're effective, well-trained, well-equipped, and relatively cheap to produce. This has led to a ton of Cadians being sent all over the galaxy. While Cadia itself isn't around anymore, a bunch of other planets saw how effective the Cadians were and basically aped their training program. So while Cadia is gone, Cadian guardsmen are not going anywhere. They are certainly not the only flavor of guardsmen, however. There are two other extremely popular regiments, these being the Death Corps of Krieg and the Catachan Jungle Fighters. Kriegsmen are all gas mask-wearing shovel enjoyers who feel horrible guilt over when their planet Krieg tried to rebel against the Emperor 500 years ago. As a result, they are led to believe that the only way they can atone for their sins is to die in service of the Emperor. They gladly accept the most horrible suicide missions and will dig their trenches all the way to victory or death, although preferably the latter. They look amazing with a very World War I German Empire aesthetic, and this is also reflected in how they fight, enjoying trenches and artillery. And there are so many memes about Kriegsmen. I love them. It's wonderful. The Catachan Jungle Fighters are all Rambo. They're big, tough, bulging biceps, exposed pecs, red headbands. They are Rambo. They hail from the horrible jungle death world of Catachan, where literally everything wants to kill you, even the frogs.
Catachan barking toads are the most poisonous creature in the galaxy. It'll let rip a cloud of toxins that can kill anything if it's feeling threatened. Even fully sealed power armor don't help.
Good. Step away from the frog.
I would like to pet this creature.
And while these are the sort of big three, there are way more regiments than these. There are the Attilan Rough Riders, Masters of Cavalry, the Vestroyan Firstborn, who look like French military and are just as entitled, and my personal favorites, the Valhallan Ice Warriors, who are a sort of World War II Russian soldier aesthetic, and they specialize in fighting in cold environments, obviously. I could go on here forever. The Guard are awesome. They're probably the only faction that are even a little bit relatable, and they've got a lot of kind of great Band of Brothers style stories about working together to overcome far more powerful beings than themselves. Very popular because of that. Also very popular because a lot of them are inspired by various historical armies, making them a favorite amongst dad gamers and history nerds. Highly recommend reading Gaunt's Ghosts if you're even a little bit interested in the Guard.
In the darkness between the stars, the weak and the faithless find no deliverance.
Sisters of Battle. Continuing our trend of normal humans, the Sisters of Battle, or Adeptus Sororitas. Although really, being human is about as far as their similarities with the Guard go. Whereas the Guard are just regular people trying to do their part and save their homes, the Sisters are completely fucking insane. A group of all-female battle nuns who wear power armor and commit some of the most heinous atrocities out there. Yes, the Sisters are genuinely one of the most horrible, evil, morally bankrupt factions in all of 40k, and I absolutely adore them. Oh my god, they're so cool. From the design of their vehicles, to the sheer force of their faith, to them just being so ridiculously over the top in every possible way. This is the triumph of St. Catherine. A funeral procession where they carry the coffin of one of their former sisters into battle because they believe it makes their faith even stronger, and they're right. This is an exorcist. It is a pipe organ. It is also a fucking artillery piece. This is Celestine, the living saint. She's actually probably some kind of ancient powerful demon who went a little bit crazy and decided she wanted to roleplay as the Emperor's biggest fangirl, and who is now revered as an actual living saint. Their faith is so strong it manifests in miracles that help them out in various ways, like shielding them from projectiles, or letting one very angry sister in particular cut through a refractor field. They are so dedicated to the Emperor and carrying out his will, it literally reshapes reality. You may also be thinking to yourself, wow, a group of all-female warriors who are also nuns. I bet they're really grossly exploited and over-sexualized. But, no. Unless you look at DeviantArt, but I expect better of you than that, soldier. They actually were pretty over-sexualized when the army originally came out in the early 90s, but in a real-life miracle of its own, a whole fanbase of RPG nerds said to Games Workshop, no, we like Warhammer because it's dark and horrible. We want our warrior women to be just as fucked up as everyone else. And GW said, bet. Thus, they went from this to this. These are both official artworks of the same units.
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me.
Adeptus Mechanicus. Speaking of insane religious people though, the Adeptus Mechanicus, or AdMech for short. These freaky lads are the crazy techno-religious cult of Mars. They believe fervently in the machine god and the Omnissiah, who's basically robot Jesus. Wait, did I hear you say worshipping a different god? Isn't that like super heresy? I thought these were an Imperial faction. Yes, they are. See, back when the Emperor departed Earth on his Great Crusade, his first stop was Mars, and he found a rather interesting development had occurred. During the Age of Strife, the humans of Mars had gotten into a big civil war for resources, which ended with the people nuking themselves into oblivion. The only survivors were those who hid underground in great vaults and tunnels, and no, it's completely different from Fallout Shut Up. Suddenly, the most important people on the planet were those who could fix and maintain all of the life support machines in those bunkers. Well, over several thousand years, the people of Mars went a little bit stir-crazy, and those engineers and tech guys went from skilled members of society to priests, channeling the will of the machine god to save the technology from evil spirits. Then once they had basically recolonized the planet, they got bored and started mass-producing tanks and mechs because why wouldn't you, I guess? And this is what the Emperor found when he showed up in the year 30,000. He said, yo boys, renounce your cringe religion and come build all my weapons for me. And the Martians responded by pointing 50 million tanks at him and saying, come at me, bro. To be fair, the Emperor probably would have won this war, but it would have been very difficult, and it was way more trouble than it was worth, so instead he was like, fine, if I let you keep your cringe religion, will you come build all my weapons for me? And they were like, yeah, why not? We've been wanting an opportunity to try out all these new guns we built anyway. Thus, the Treaty of Mars was signed, and the Cult Mechanicum, shortly renamed to the Adeptus Mechanicus, joined the Imperium, while still being able to practice their own religion. The first and only exception to the Imperial truth, which still stands to this day. And over time, their religion has become a deeply ingrained part of the Imperium. Everyone must pray to the machine god. If you want machines to work, you must appease its machine spirit via religious rituals, from the smallest machine to the biggest. You want that las gun to fire properly? Well, you'd better say a prayer and burn some incense. You want that tank to turn on? Then we must all form a circle and chant while burning candles. The bigger the machine spirit, and the more elaborate the ceremony, with some of them taking up to 3 days for the biggest ships and walkers. As readily as one believes in the Emperor, one may recite a quick prayer to the Omnissiah before using their blessed las gun. While not everyone higher up in the Imperium is a big fan of this, they do build all of your guns, so suck it up. As for guardsmen and, your normal folk, if saying a quick prayer to the Omnissiah is going to make sure my las gun doesn't break down with a horde of orcs barreling down on me, you better believe I'm going to be preaching that good word. All jokes aside, yes, the Imperium is incredibly hypocritical, so while it may sound a bit weird, the machine god is just an accepted thing. The Admech believe that the flesh is weak, and to better serve the Omnissiah, they must replace all of this weak flesh with glorious steel. Technology is our salvation, and we must become one with it. And they look so incredibly cool. Like, incredibly religious, but with all this crazy cybernetic body horror stuff going on. The AdMech are awesome. They're crazy and they're super unique. I can say with certainty I have not seen anything like them anywhere else. If you want to get into the AdMech and learn what they're about even more, I highly recommend Mechanicus. It's an XCOM-y strategy game that is one of the best 40k games out there, and it easily has one of the best soundtracks of any video game ever. A lot of the music in this video will probably be from that game. One of the most memed factions in Warhammer, the Adeptus Custodes. The big banana boys are the Emperor's personal bodyguards and the toughest warriors the Imperium has to offer. Why are they memed on so much? It's not because they're bad, it's because of text-to-speech. If you've never heard of it, If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device is an absolutely iconic YouTube series, and it portrays the Custodes as a bunch of flamboyant homosexuals who all started a big gay orgy when they got bored guarding the Imperial Palace for too long.
My glorious overlord, the Emperor of mankind. Holy shit.
If Space Marines are super soldiers, the Custodes are super duper soldiers. The details are kept intentionally murky, but whereas a Space Marine is a human teen that undergoes some invasive surgery and organ transplants, the Custodes are essentially completely rebuilt as a baby from the ground up on a genetic level. And they are perfect. Basically to a Space Marine what Space Marines are to normal people. They're like 9 feet tall, stronger, faster, and smarter. They don't eat or sleep, and they stand guard perfectly still for over 100 years at a time. Wow, they sound kinda overpowered. Surely they must have some kind of weakness. And yeah, their weakness is that there aren't very many of them. 10,000. May sound like a lot, but remember I said there are 1 million Space Marines and like 100 billion Guardsmen. Also, of that 10,000, the vast majority of them are always stationed on Earth. The Custodes operate outside of the Imperium's normal structure. They are loyal to the Emperor, and only the Emperor. They have no concern for whatever else is going on throughout the galaxy, as long as Big E is safe. Oh well, at least until this Giga Chad got made Captain General and was like, the galaxy needs us boys, we ride. And since then they've become quite a bit more active in other places, but still most of them are stationed on Earth at all the time, as defending Big E is their main priority. So that's all of the major playable faction, but there are a couple other smaller groups I'll quickly mention. First up, the Sisters of Silence. They're not a full playable faction, they've only got a couple of units, but they're really cool, and they work a lot with the Custodes. Remember when I said all living things are born with a connection to the warp? Well, I lied. Very rarely, some people are born with no soul and no connection to the warp. These people are called blanks or pariahs. They are named this because they emit a constant aura of discomfort to people around them. Since everyone has this psychic connection, when somebody doesn't, it's extremely off-putting. It can make people feel irritated, upset, queasy, depressed. It's like the uncanny valley for your soul. Because of this, most pariahs do not live very long. Think about it, your newborn baby literally emits an awful aura of discomfort whenever you're in the same room of it. 40k is a brutal universe, and infanticide is very much on the table. Most of the ones who aren't straight up murdered get exiled, but of the very small number of pariahs who survive to adulthood, some of them can join the Sisters of Silence. They train to harness this weird aura they emit, and can even make it stronger. What I haven't mentioned yet is what this aura does to psychers. A normal person with a small warp connection, uneasy. A psyker with a much stronger connection to the warp, horrible physical sickness, a brutal migraine, weakening of their own warp powers. Because of this, the Sisters of Silence are almost exclusively an anti-psyker group, and they're really good at it. Just existing makes them good at it. And this is why they often work with the Custodians. While the Custodians are insanely fast and powerful, that ain't shit when a psyker halts you with just his big ol' noggin. So in come the Sisters to take down any potent psychic threats. They're really cool. I wish they had, more models and lore, because at the moment they have like 2, but yeah, Sisters of Silence. Knights. Knights technically are, like their own faction. They're great big ol' mechs. They come from old lineages like medieval knights. They have lots of big guns. They're pretty cool, but there's not a lot to say about them. They're big mechs. In terms of the tabletop, if you're looking to get into it, this is not a great place to start. They're very weird. They can make an awesome painting project, but they play very differently to every other army. and they don't have a whole lot of lore. Special shout out to my homeboy the Knight Valiant though. It has a triple barrel flamethrower, that is all. The Inquisition. Everybody expects the Imperial Inquisition. Seriously, for a very hush-hush secret organization, they have so many books and stories written about them, it's a bit silly. The Inquisition is basically what you would expect it to be, a clandestine group of secret police with total autonomy to do whatever they think is best for the security of the Imperium. And they are just as horrible as you think when you hear the term secret police. If you're thinking Gestapo or NKVD with a religious twist, yeah, you got the picture. They're split into 3 branches called Ordos, which are the Ordo Malleus, which focuses on demons, the Ordo Xenos, which focuses on aliens, and the Ordo Hereticus, which focuses on, I'm sure you can guess, tax evasion. They also have the ability to declare Exterminatus. Exterminatus is the complete and total destruction of a planet. I promise you though, the Inquisition takes this power very seriously. They understand the responsibility that comes with it, and they would never abuse this power for any reason. Assassins. Not a proper faction, but I gotta mention them because they're pretty cool. The Officio Assassinorum, aka the Imperial Assassins. Basically, there's this thing called the Schola Progenium, which is like an orphanage for kids whose parents died in the service of the Imperium, where they're trained to be soldiers or administrators, whatever. Some of the kids who go there, however, will just disappear. Vanish without a trace. Notably, mostly kids who are really good at being sneaky or fighting. Funny how that works. This is the recruitment process for the Officio Assassinorum. These kids are then basically put through the Hunger Games, and then the survivors of that go through an incredibly brutal training regimen that lasts years, and a lot more of them die. Of the 5% who make it through all of this, they are then sorted into one of 4 temples, where they go through even more training to specialize in what each temple does. The first temple is the Vindicare, expert marksman capable of holding a position for days, never moving, waiting for a single glimpse of their target, then bang. I think they're the most common type of assassin, and they're a bit generic, but they're pretty cool. The Calidus are the infiltrators. They will go into deep cover for years, slowly working their way up the chain of a criminal organization or cult or whatever, and then they get one chance encounter with the boss / their target, and pop. They're also all sexy ladies in skin-tight catsuits, so yeah, DeviantArt goes crazy with these ones. The next 2 temples are more interesting though. The Eversor Temple. These guys are terrorists. You know the brainwashing scene in A Clockwork Orange? Yeah, do that to a genetically enhanced superhuman, times about 100, then pump him full of hallucinogenic drugs and freeze him. Then, whenever you find, say, a chaos cult that you don't like, and you want to convince everybody else on that planet that joining chaos is a very bad idea, you drop in an Eversor. They get unfrozen on their way down, and their brain is shown images of their targets. By the time they land in an enemy camp, they are a frothing psycho rage machine who brutally murders every living thing in the vicinity, violently and painfully. All that will remain of that enemy encampment is a big gory mess and a very clear message to everyone else: don't mess with the Imperium. Finally, we have my favorite assassin temple, the Coluxus. The most mysterious and dangerous of the 4 temples, feared even by other assassins. Remember the pariahs? All of the Sisters of Silence? Yeah, so all of the Coluxus are that, but trained so hard to control this ability that it essentially becomes a weapon. They are then given this crazy headset that A, looks baller, and B, amplifies the effect of that aura by 100, and can even be directed into a channeled beam of anti-warp energy. Their blank aura is so strong that people will pass out, start puking, or get horrible migraines just from being in their vicinity. And remember how I said that aura is stronger against psychers? Yeah, psychers in the vicinity of a Coluxus have a very bad time. They will be driven insane, their brain will melt in their head, they'll start tearing at their own skin or gouge their eyes out because the pain of being in the same room as these guys is just too intense. And then it turns out it's pretty easy to kill your target when they drop to the ground and literally beg you to kill them. You can probably gather then the Coluxus are usually assigned to kill psychers. Not always, they're still incredibly effective, highly trained assassin who give normal people brutal headaches, so they're still pretty good at killing non-psychers. Even the Tau, actually, who have like a really muted connection to the warp, are horribly affected by a Coluxus. Their creed/motto is like the fucking video. Oops, sorry. It's that which is unknown and unseen commands the greatest fear. They are so incredibly ruthless in the pursuit of their target and so cold while doing it that even the Eldar, these guys, are afraid of them. I've avoided quotes so far because I don't really like them, but this one is so cool, I just had to include it. Elder Farseer Lithandros Esmanthil. It is a creature of utter abhorrence, of near unspeakable horror. Only the humans could spawn such a creature, so debased are they, so lacking in breeding. Yet even they, as crude and blind as they are, can see this creature, this thing, for what it truly is. It is unnatural, for it is not of the chaos that binds all things together. It has no life in the other world, it has no existence except in the physical. It is a dead thing that thinks and breathes, the most hideous abomination. Even the humans who tolerate the stench and squalor of their own cannot bear this monster. They try to control it with their clumsy technology, using devices which they barely comprehend, to guard others against the hungering maw which serves as its spirit. To even consider harnessing such unpleasant freaks of creation is to invite disaster. This thing stalks me now, and I who have seen the birth of stars and the death of galaxies, am afraid. So yeah, the Coluxes are pretty cool. Anything that makes the Eldar unhappy makes me very happy. And I think that's it. I think that's everybody. The Imperium gets so much lore, it's kind of crazy. And I don't know how many parts this video is going to end up being, but if it's a lot, you can blame the Imperium. With them finally taken care of, though, we can move on to our next major umbrella. Except, actually, that's where I'm going to end part 1 of this video. If you've enjoyed it so far, or if you've learned anything, please like, subscribe, comment, share it with your friends, all of the YouTube stuff. It has taken me a very long time to make this, so I would truly appreciate it. Part 2, which I don't know if this is going to be 2 or 3 parts yet, but part 2 will be out next week, which will focus on Chaos and possibly Xenos, depending on how long the Chaos part takes. But again, any support on this video would be amazing. That is it for me. I'm going to get back to working on part 2. Goodbye.